I just want to say how nice these virtual conferences are. I am a big believer in them. I think they create a different kind of intimacy. It's not the same thing as having a dessert with somebody at the lunch table. But as I was listening to Mike Cohen, I was thinking it was just like he was here. And as you know, he is the kind of doctor, when he gives out his email address, he really means it. He has helped me over the years when somebody's ENT doctor just wanted a little more information, he will actually make the personal outreach. So let me just share my screen, please. This is a very different kind of talk. This is not about a topic, clinical topic. The parents had asked me to do this, and I was happy to. I've called it, We've Only Just Begun. Here we are at this great moment. But what about a next step, which would be planning to write Myhre syndrome evidence-based care guidelines? And I want to pause and just thank Joe Shi. Is he still here as a guest? Can somebody check for me? Maybe not. It was wonderful to have him to discuss this, and I asked him if we could even make him a co-author. So these are my disclosures, things that I work with outside of Myhre syndrome. So the purpose in 15 minutes is to define clinical practice guidelines. What are these things? And to review the current state of clinical care management for Myhre syndrome, identify goals for an evidence-based clinical care guidelines. What's the timeline? What's really realistic? What are the logistics? Who would be committee members? Another subcommittee. And I will draw upon my previous personal experiences with guideline creation. Does not mean I'm an expert, but I've just had some experience. And I had this idea that maybe we might work with a mentor through the ACMG, American College of Medical Genetics. They actually call this person a methodologist, but Joe and I have decided not to, but I just mentioned that, and propose a realistic action plan. So again, I showed this familiar map just to show that this is not just about me or just about the Professional Advisory Board, but about colleagues all around the world, and we continue to grow. So what are these guidelines? They seem pretty intuitive, don't they? But these clinical practice guidelines have structure, they have organization, they have backing. So here is actually a book. Imagine that there's so much information. Somebody wrote a book about it from the National Institutes of Medicine. And it's also available, part of it online. And so here is just a little thing I sort of excerpted just to say that there are evidence foundation, excuse me, let me get rid of this. Picture out of the way. There we go. For each recommendation provided, a summary of evidence, potential benefits and harms, differences of opinion, level of confidence, strength of recommendation, blah, blah, blah. So these are terms and concepts that will come up again. Now I'm going to show you just some visuals. I'm not going to cite them, but I just want to give you the idea of what's involved. So one familiar graphic is a pyramid, the evidence-based pyramid. So you have stuff at the bottom that are the original studies, reviewing, getting the guidelines, and people have different ways of presenting this. I love Venn diagrams. This shows the overlap of clinical experience, what doctors will say, patient values, the best evidence, the literature, and somehow at the intersection of all of these is enough information for people to write guidelines. This is another guideline style. It looks like sort of a set of stairs, and it represents the sort of the intersection of different types of guidelines. We'll show this one later, different levels of expertise. And here's another one, which they're all similar actually, it's just the diagram is a little bit different. So this talks about the highest level. Mark mentioned this, the RCT, randomized control trial. Who wouldn't want that? Then there are other trials that maybe are not the same. Then there are observational studies, case control, cohort design. That's what Nicole is doing with the losartan. Expert opinion. That's what we do when doctors get together and we give our opinion. We weigh the pros and cons. And then there's something called exceptional situations where you have this unique treatment, a unique patient, and a unique situation. And then you can take this evidence quality and you can divide it into the preponderance of benefit or harm, the balance of benefit or harm. So you can tell that if you have the right population, the tools, you can really dig deep to make this evidence-based. So I'm going to give you an example of certain organizations that have done this. The AAP had a paper in 2004 classifying recommendations for clinical practice guidelines. So this could be used by a variety of different groups. There is the aggregate data, evaluate the evidence, designate the guidelines. You're going to hear these themes over and over. And here's one from the Annals of Internal Medicine. Same thing, developing these things, summary of the methods, 2010. This is their graphic portrayal, the way they depict it, a little bit different. This is like a super duper table, sort of an expansion of something I showed you. The columns represent the grade of recommendation, the benefit versus risks and burdens, methodological quality and supporting evidence, interpretation and implications. And you're probably thinking, well, just point to what I need to know. And the answer is it's not that simple. So we have this stuff at the top. These are the best guidelines, the best evidence. Then it gets a little bit weaker. And then this is the reality. This is what we usually deal with. It's weak. And this is all we have, so you make the best of it. So currently, as a pragmatic substitute, is Gene Reviews from 2017. Gene Reviews is not meant to be guidelines, not at all, but it's the best that we have. And basically it includes a review of the literature, a review of the findings, testing, and then at the end we have, some suggestions. And, I participated in writing this, and you have to weigh every word really carefully. So just to let you know, these are written carefully and they're peer reviewed because we know people are going to be looking at them. And I always, I've said this in another talk. In the meantime, when people don't have guidelines, what do they do? What do their doctors do? Well, they hit Google, they hit the literature, and they will find all these great talks on the Myhre Syndrome Foundation, but people may not have time to do that. You can go to our hospital website. We have a lot of stuff there. NORD, the NIH Genetics Medline is a nice, cool, short survey of a condition. I help them curate their one on Myhre syndrome. I mentioned the conference, and some articles are available just in the public domain. I've mentioned this before. My approach to thinking about Myhre syndrome is a lifespan approach with different features at different ages. So what can you do? Again, what do you do if you don't have those guidelines? I mentioned you set up your goal. I suggested Gene Reviews, but what groups will do are called management guidelines. And we did this for Costello. Basically, we were people been working together for years. We did this through email. People took the lead. They went back and forth. Each of us wrote our little thing. I helped do the heart. Then they synthesized it. It took about 2 or maybe always 3 years. It takes time, but these are currently the guidelines that people are using. So they're not evidence-based. They're basically experts in the field. And the product looks like this, a nice table. So you can say, okay, what do we do for the heart? And so you go to the row that says the heart. It talks to you about what the defects are. What do you do at diagnosis? What do you do? So they're very useful. So here's my experience with an evidence-based guidelines group. And when we get to the discussion, if any of my colleagues want to, chip in with what they've done. So this was for Turner syndrome, and the leader in the field had been Carolyn Bondi, and she did this in 2007. So we did this in 2017. We had very strong leadership. Klaus Gravhold is an endocrinologist from Denmark. He has a whole team of his of Denmark colleagues. And then the senior author was Philippe Bakeljo, and he is from Cincinnati. And I'm in here as one of the genetic people. So it was incredibly rigorous. You got a formal invitation. You had to sign a formal acceptance. You were given your committee. You were assigned your role. We were given a strict timeline. We had to make these meetings. One of the things that happens in genetics is people who do things maybe sort of as one-off or on their own, when you get to bigger things, you just have to play by rules. So those were our rules. And then the type of guidelines that comes out is something like this. This is ours, diagnosis and genetics. Recommendation 1.1. We recommend such and such, and then a code for the evidence that went with it. We recommend against so-and-so. But it went through this for everyone, and that's why this article is 70 pages. So we use the luxury of a generous journal. This is not a high impact journal, European Journal of Endocrinology, but it was very generous, and we appreciated that. I did not participate in this, but this came out of a disorder I work with called HHT, hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia. And this was their second guidelines meeting. And you literally meet in person and you go over these different criteria. It takes a while to do the write-up and people become the first and the senior author, but a product comes out and it's great. So it is evidence-based. They went through all these same rigorous things. Notice the letters here. They worked with a group called, I think they used the GRADE, and I'm going to tell you about that later on. And here's something that I found that is sort of more user-friendly. And maybe Nicole, if he's still on, would tell me what he thinks about this because he does metabolism. This was published recently. Molecular Genetics and Metabolism is a systematic review and evidence-based guideline for the diagnosis and treatment of Menkes disease. And here in the methodology, I circled, they used a program called Population Intervention Comparator. It was a format, I'm not familiar with it. And what they focused on was early neonatal diagnosis, prenatal genetic diagnosis, treatment, and prediction. So they didn't do it by organ system. Okay, remember the other ones were sort of tell us about the nose bleeding, telling you about the lung, telling you about the brain in HHT, and similarly for Turner syndrome. So this was more sort of problem period focused. So how would you begin? How would we even start this after this test? Well, after this talk, well, it would help to have co-directors or a couple people. And Joe said he would volunteer with me. I dragged him into this, and we're welcome to as many people. This could be, a leadership of 4, 6, whatever. Then we would form sort of an organ system division. That's very easy. We all sort of have our natural division of labor. Each committee would have a team. I know you're probably thinking this is a lot of work. Well, there's an endpoint. And then we have to anticipate when we would like to present this. When do we want to bring closure? What would be the timeline? So you have to divide the work. I have this idea that many of us work with trainees, fellows, and residents. They may not see this as really a career building project. Maybe the Myhre Syndrome Foundation could sponsor we'll call it the Myhre Syndrome Foundation Fellow, a moderate amount, but just somebody to do some of the grunt work because there's a lot of grunt work in this. And then you have to meet. So currently we have a monthly professional advisory board, and believe it or not, we meet monthly, and it's been a joy. So we could incorporate it into that standing meeting. It could be maybe bi-monthly we would do this. Of course, there'll be other things. I always believe in thinking about the journal where I want to publish something, regardless of whether it's a guideline or whether it's just a paper. I want to anticipate who my audience will be. So this will probably be geneticists, cardiologists, each of the specialists. And sometimes what you do is you think of a journal, you sacrifice maybe high impact if they'll give you lots of pages versus limited pages but a higher impact. So you make a decision. And you can sometimes send a query letter to the editor. Dear editor, do you think this is something you would publish? You also want to be thinking about specialty organizations. It's a lot of foresight, isn't it? Who would be interested in this? The American College of Medical Genetics, AAP, hopefully the American Heart Association. I don't know the pulmonology group, but and so on. So this is sort of a screenshot of an illustration of a very impressive project that was done by the American Heart Association in a high impact journal circulation. And we don't need to go over, we don't need to go over each of these. Let me go back. Okay, you can see though it's a pathway. You get the topic, identify the leadership, meetings, ask questions, review the literature, review the data. And this is a larger version of what I'd shown you earlier on. So this says size of treatment effect. Class 1, the benefit far outweighs the risk. Class 2 benefit mostly, and then you sort of get into this lesser realm. It's actually red because it could be no benefit or harm. Now you notice what's going on here is the purpose isn't so much when do I do an echo, it's more about treatment and therapy. So that's why the idea of risk is entered. And then you have across here, this is estimate of certainty, precision of effect, the different populations, whether limited, very limited. And then there's different phrasing for how you write this. Should, is recommended, is indicated, is useful. So a lot of nuances there. So part of doing these guidelines is to begin by saying, what questions do we want to ask? So with Turner syndrome, we asked, What is the definition of Turner syndrome? And you would think we already know those things, right? But you sort of break it down into all the component parts. So we might say, what is the definition of Myhre syndrome? How does one diagnose it? Who is involved in the diagnosis of Myhre? And what are the indications for testing? Now, sort of the juicy questions. How do different genotype-phenotype associations influence recommendations? Now, we're not doing the research. Does that make sense, folks? We're reviewing the literature and the research that discusses these things. Is there a need for an earlier diagnosis of Myhre syndrome? How can we propose to advance research? What are the priorities for future research? And when you do this sort of project, you often don't do it by yourself. You work with I think it's called a program. I'm not sure if it's an organization or a company. They're based out of Canada. We had worked with somebody called The Grade. The grade was very rigorous. You gave them your question, then they gave you all these different fields that you had to fill in. So for a lot of the work that I was doing with just diagnosis and Turner syndrome, it was, no data, cannot answer. But for things like the role of growth hormone or the role of losartan, you would look at, you would use something like this. This grade analysis often cannot complete questions if the data is insufficient, if the n is too small. So here's a big one. What is currently known about genotype phenotype correlation studies? So in fact, there is not one yet. We're sort of working on it. The American College of Medical Genetics sent out an email and Joe and I answered it. They had this interesting proposal. They said, listen, all you groups out there who want to do evidence-based guidelines, we're going to have a lottery. You have to submit your nominations by a certain date, June the 18th. We're going to do this as rolling. We might do it again. And I contacted them right away. I said, oh, I think this is right for us. It turns out that there's a lot more involved. You really have to already have done something before you get to their level. It was very competitive. They were only good to take two, and I decided not to pursue it. And Joe agreed with me. We were not ready. This is my organization, American College of Medical Genetics, and Joe also. And this was a paper they just published, which was interesting. They used their own rules, their own tools to produce a paper about exome and genome sequencing, evidence-based. I mean, we're all eating this up because this is really the highest level of discussion of a very difficult topic. So as I said, there were two groups initially, rolling nominations. We might have a chance to do it again if assuming it lasts more than just 2 or 3 years. So again, getting back to this notion of who's the target. So the main target you would think would be endocrinology, correct? This is for Turner syndrome, genetics, cardiology. And in fact, we did something really cool. And as I think about doing guidelines, I think about it for Myhre syndrome. You not only have the official super duper publication, you create something that is family friendly. It's got colors, it's got pictures, it's more succinct, and it's so useful that I will often give this out to people instead of the official one. And there was also a spin-off paper. Mark would be interested. These are some of the people who work in the field of adult CHD. Very impressive authorship. You can see it here, very impressive. And they created one just about cardiovascular health, published it in Circulation. So in summary, evidence-based clinical guidelines are a necessity. We always say as soon as possible. There are many good models about disorders, both common and rare, and we will model. We don't have to invent. But reality check. Despite the urgency, there is considerable time. And here's the big clinker. We don't have the publications. We don't have the evidence to judge. There are several papers in progress. I can think of at least 4, a few close to submission. But I have to tell you that your board members work constantly. We see patients. We have to manage them. We have to talk to our colleagues. That's just the clinical end of it. And we are, to be honest, all of us are stretched to our max. What makes us more efficient are helpers. So my efficiency should expand this year for Mark and I, now that we have a research assistant. For example, Bert, his efficiency is improved because he has not one but 2 fellows. He has Tim Van Dam, who's a nephrologist, and then Ilse Myhre, who's a cardiologist. So planning an evidence-based conference, folks, it takes about 2 years just to plan it. Can you believe it? That's what it took for the Turner one. And once we got underway, I had to really sort of push aside a lot of publications. I had to focus on this. Once we hit the timeline for the meeting, we then had a year to write it up. So you a person is giving part of their life to do it. Is it worth it? Yes, but there's a lot involved. And so Joe and I want to put out this proposal. We want to focus on the 2022 update of gene reviews. It's not perfect. We can make it better. Use what is familiar, convenient, and doable. And so here's what it looks like from 2017. I will take the lead on this. Lois will still be involved. I've asked Joe and Mark. I'd be happy to invite one of my European colleagues. In the early years, as you may know, Gene Reviews was like 2 authors. Then they expanded a little bit, and I think that it's fine to invite somebody else. So this talk serves as a stimulus for discussion, invitation for comments. So we have our assignments. The board will talk about this on one of the monthly Zoom calls. I don't want to force anybody to do that, but I don't think there's anybody from the board who will clamor for a guidelines meeting next year. We just don't have the bandwidth. The board of directors, you guys should talk about it on your meetings and then come up with a summary, submit them to me. Attendees of the conference are welcome to think about this. Colleagues who have done this for other disorders should also, show themselves and let us know. So here's the timeline that I propose, October 2021. The comments from the different boards should sort of be fused. We should take a look at them. And then by January, we should have a final discussion, assigning the literature review, because I'll use some of this, I'll model some of this. And then we start writing. The good news is that because this is a gene reviews revision, it's going to be easier. They have a template. They're very strict about it. They do their own reviewing in real time. So we'll crunch out our first draft. They'll come back. Usually it takes about 2 or 3 drafts to get it done. I did one last year about a syndrome called Sensenbrenner. It was very efficient. And maybe by June, we'd have an initial submission. Maybe by next summer, it would be available. Maybe the summer or the fall. Sorry about that. If data is sufficient, here's our goal. We could plan for a formal guidelines conference, but not next year, maybe 2023 or 2024. So thank you to everybody for this conference, for putting it together, the movers, shakers, and leaders, and there's lots of you, the organizer of this meeting in particular, to the Professional Advisory Board. And I got to tell you, I keep saying this, there could be no better board out there because each person brings something to it. Nobody has to attend 100% of the time, but I know that they're there. So it's really been a pleasure. And my own Myhre Syndrome Clinic team, and to all of you, you are not our patients, you are our teachers. And I think we really live it. We just don't say that. So thank you for your time. Any thoughts from my listeners out there?
Hi, Dr. Lynn. No questions, but if I may, I have a few.
Go for it.
So, this is our first conference, right? And I know that for you, this is a lot of years of life, blood, tears, sweat, challenges, everything. What would you do different for 2022?
Oh, just in general?
Yeah.
I think it's perfect. I mean, first of all, I don't mind if it's virtual again, but that's me. I'm a big fan of virtual meetings. Number two, though, I can't wait to have us all together. I can't wait for one child to see another child. The bonding will be like instantaneous. It'll be great. So that's your decision, though. You guys can decide if you think that's practical. As you know, or I don't know if I told you, the reason people usually have these meetings in the summer is to get a lower hotel rate. So I've been to a lot of meetings in Texas and and Florida in July because that's when you can get the better hotel rates. But who knows what next year is going to bring. If you guys want to do a virtual again, I'm totally on board. What's the feeling of the board of directors, Justin? Have you gone that far yet to think?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a ton of dialogue, and to be honest, I think we are all just overjoyed. One, I mean, the chat panel has been nothing but an inspiration to us. Everybody just seems encouraged by the things that they've heard. They seem excited about the things that they're learning, and I get a sense of the community that's involved here. So I don't think we could have asked for a better conference. And you guys were the speakers, your professional advisory board, and everybody that has been involved with Myhre patients are the ones that put it on. So, I think it's you all that really inspire us. So
Well,
thank you.
next year, well, first of all, I think an annual meeting could work. Think of what we're going to save in hotel room fees and transportation. I know people want to get together. It's possible what people might end up doing is regional. There might be the East Coast, West Coast, North and South, mini meetings, something like that. That's what we might need to do for a while. Number two, next year for me as a professional goal, I'm going to ask each board member to bring somebody else. Everybody's got to bring a new person. I disclosed in one of the chats that Lois inspired me. I met Lois at a meeting, standing by a poster she had put out, and I just was thrilled with it. And that's how it works in this field. You sort of get somebody excited about it, and I'm sure it will happen. It will happen. So we would try to double maybe some of the number of professionals.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the same too. A lot of the things that what we've heard, they love the personal stories, the personal accounts. So anybody out there, that's listening, we love the stories. We want volunteers. We want those involved because the more people that help us, both financially and with your volunteer time, it's important, and it just helps us do this all better. So if you're hearing me, thank you.
Yeah.
One thing that has come up: how can we help support your vision, and how can the community help support your vision um, for the future?
I think people are doing it already. The feeling is there. People are dying to come to say MGH. I feel that the fundraising support has been the best that it can. To be honest, a lot of what we're doing depends on funds. My wish list would be to have a genetic counselor. If I had another human being to help me, unfortunately, I haven't been able to entice any of the genetic fellows, and I always talk it up, always talking up Myhre syndrome, and they love it, but nobody's been willing to sort of devote a chunk of their career. For a lot of fellows, I don't know if Barrett runs into this. You actually need to help fund their salaries, and I don't have that. But if I had a genetic counseling, I want to be able to speed up. We went from once a month to two patients a month. I do some in between. The pandemic, as you know, Justin, was a boon. I got to do all these virtual visits around the world, and then boom, it stopped. So I can only do them in Massachusetts and states where I'm getting licensed: New Hampshire, Maine, and Rhode Island. So I would say, thank you for the funds. Everything counts. We're all out there. There's a time, may I just speak to the parents? There's a time where doctors never talked about money. It was sort of the ick factor. But once you enter academic medicine and you have to do this fundraising, you just need to do it. You may have saw some of the sponsors were my sisters. I have four sisters. I said, come on, guys, forget the birthday present, make a gift. And they did. And people are usually happy. You just have to go out there and do the ask as you do all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, because I feel like sometimes we're trying to pull on heartstrings to get people to give money, and that's not. We're not about just raising money. I mean, but the unfortunate truth is we have to have money to do all the things that we want to do. So we feel you exactly.
So I think what helps also is when people participate. I think the enthusiasm for participating is very strong. I completely respected the people who did not want to have their child's face on the talk. That's fine with me. But people have been very, interested in what we're doing and writing up stuff like that. So that's great. So I think we're there already, Justin. It's just more and continuing. I think that we need to keep supporting the basic scientists, and that would be Valerie. And I don't know her exact mechanism there, and Nicola, who's trying to do a clinical study, and Mark in his lab too. But I think you're all aware of that. I don't want to belabor that.
Yeah, and I know that Kathy touched on this later, but anybody that is listening or that will listen, we will have mechanisms to put that through what's called an IRB, and we'll review each person that submits money for a grant to make sure that we're stewarding all those resources wisely, and that includes Dr. Lynn and some of the voices that you heard this week. So again, anything helps. Again, we don't want you all to think that this is about money, but we do need, the more we have, the more we can do.
Sure.
So,
I'm reading a couple comments from people around the world. And, maybe a goal might be just like little regional get-togethers. Once everybody feels confident and safe about the pandemic, that those are things that people might try to do. And people can do that as small groups, do a little chunk up in the Northwest, but there's so many hurdles we have to overcome in terms of health safety, but we'll get there. It'll happen.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Lynn. You've been amazing. Does anybody have any other questions? Feel free to put it on real quick. I do see something in the Q&A.
Oh, so tomorrow, who I don't know, but I've seen her name, she said virtual would be awesome for us here over the ponds. I just want to speak to all the international families. I hope that we have embraced you. We know you're out there. This is not meant to be MGH or US. This is a global community. This is a global condition. I think you can see that at the top where the researchers are working, we're totally there already. But I want the parents to feel that, we think about you guys all the time. And I guess I want to talk to the people who I know are clamoring for help. I could feel it in the in the comments. There's some people are saying, I'm just not getting what I want. Well, this is a first step. The first step is to educate yourself. The next step is to take materials and you have to talk to your doctors. Healthcare around the world, man, how heterogeneous is that? So many different styles. So my advice won't help you, but you just have to take this step and try to make it your first step. If things aren't any better in a year, we'll have to come up with something different. But there's some wonderful Europeans, especially Sophia, who has offered to, do outreach for people in Europe, which is really very generous.
Yeah. And please continue to share information, any gaps that you see from the foundation in our coverage. We're always looking for new individuals to either volunteer or for new physicians that we can link arms with. Ideally, we want to everybody across the globe to feel like this is a global foundation. Again, we're doing the best that we can. And unfortunate truth is that it's easier locally. So we need your help to be more global.
So I have a pitch. You can tell I
Yeah,
don't want to go. So I have a pitch for you guys.
please bring it on.
I've been thinking about this CORDS registry ever since you developed it. And through the medical world, there's always been sort of I don't want to say tension, but there's been a paradigm. Each researcher at each hospital maintains their special database or whatever. We have to. It has to be internal, has to be secure, and it's very focused on details, percentages, pressures, etc. But I think the CORDS registry has a great role. I remember helping Kathy write some of the questions, which were based on their suggestions. I've also been told that you can modify them. But I think we call a patient facing registry, is ideal for, say, demographics, attitudes. I was thinking respiratory symptoms. I was thinking about access to care. A first project could address some of those things where you would say, we have X number of people, this is where they live. You could ask them, where did you get the diagnosis? Pediatrician, geneticist, just very basic stuff. There are medical journals that will publish things. Usually it's a journal for special needs people. It wouldn't be a high impact, but it's doable. You could, I made a note about respiratory symptoms, so important. And I think we physicians only get a fraction of it, okay? Or we're sitting in clinic trying to write them real fast, we don't get them all. But you guys can make it more in depth. I think another thing that this registry would do better would be to talk about attitudes of childbearing and pregnancy. I try to note if a mother had tried to get pregnant, I probably missed some things. So that's the sort of thing that's sometimes better for a parent registry. And the whole notion of attitudes. Kathy, I don't know if people know, Kathy Young did a mini survey where we said to you, parents, what is the most important thing? Remember in Mark's talk, would it be autism? Make it better, make it go away. Number two, heart disease, blood pressure, find a way to treat it. What about lung disease? I could go on through the list. I think one of the criteria was it's the unknown, it's the scary part. We'd like to make that better. So you tell us what you think is the most important thing. What are the priorities? And that will help drive, some of the research. Because in general, we don't think of a research as a cure-all. We try to focus it. Mark Lindsay did such a beautiful job of explaining that approach of how we do it systematically. And it would be nice to have a physician, maybe somebody could be from the board, Justin, but somebody else. There might be somebody who knows a pediatrician, who knows a geneticist at home, who's saying, I'm just dying to get into this stuff. It would be perfect for somebody to take the lead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all wonderful. And we'll include that in our follow-up notes and, add that as part of our general discussion. Love the idea though. Thank you.
And make it a co-authorship with a member, a person, a parent. It's hard to learn how to write medical papers. I sort of teach that to people. It's just a practice you need to learn, and but to do it with somebody would work out better. But you need to find somebody who's done this before, who's written a paper. It can't be just somebody who likes the patients. We need a little bit more academic expertise.
That's great. So if anybody does have that out there, send us a hook. Okay, we'd love to hear from you.